complex in different ways. Now, here are just some figures I have for the last three elections. So last four, sorry. 2010, 2013, 2016, and 2019. So we have been increasing in terms of registered voters. I don't have the data for 2021 yet because the registrations are still ongoing. But once the registrations have closed, we should have figures. We expect it to be similar to the 2019 figures. The clustered precincts will probably increase due to pandemic-related concerns. Therefore, social distancing and spacing is now required. That's why there is a requirement to have more clustered precincts to reduce the number of registered voters per clustered precinct, right? So these numbers will probably change for 2022. Right, so now let us go on to some of the myths we would like to talk about, or some of the issues that we would like to clarify. So the first one, and saw some of you at the PPCR, saw some of you at the KBP were with me during this 7-hour glitch. So let's talk about the 7-hour glitch first. So the issue is basically we were not able to get our results file, and therefore we were not able to broadcast or publish the ongoing election results as they were being transmitted from various vote counting machines nationwide. So the manifestation of the glitch was that we got an initial set of results for a few clustered precincts, and we waited 7 hours until we got the rest of the results. Now, the challenge was when the 7 hours passed, practically the election was done. So we had a challenge here because of lack of visibility. However, during that entire period, we were able to monitor as part of the dashboard that was provided by COMELEC at the transparency server room. The results were coming in despite the fact we were not able to get the results file. So in order to check if things were above board, we did the following things, right? So this is just a quick summary of the activities we did. So the first one was we were given access to the actual log files of the transparency server. We validated the transparency server log files. We also checked that there were no additional logins to the transparency server between the time before the election started and the time that the logs were all obtained. So there was no tampering of the log files between that period. The image you see out of the upper left is the comparison between the log file timestamp at the results file, which we received after 7 hours, and the actual log file entries in the server. So as you see in this particular chart, they matched, right? So that's the first thing we validated. The second thing we validated was we also wanted to compare the results obtained by the transparency server versus another server. Now we know for a fact that the COMELEC website gets its data from something called a central server, which is one of the 3 recipients of the election results during election day. So the VCM will send its results to the Municipal Board of Canvassers, the central server, and the transparency server. So we wanted to use the transparency server and the central server. We wanted to compare the results to make sure they match. So this second chart here just basically shows us on what we did. We basically got the results, or we screen scraped the results from the central server through the COMELEC public access website, and we compared the results with the results we got from the transparency server after 7 hours. After doing that comparison, we were able to see that the results actually matched as well. Right? The third one, so there were just So there's effective match. The rest of the details here were the volunteers that helped us with the screen scraping and getting of the data. And the third analysis we did was we basically looked at the log files itself. So since we had access to the log files already, which COMELEC granted us and a handful of observers, we were able to look at the log files as well and try to look and to make a guess on where the possible issues were. We looked at the log files and we saw that portion that exports or generates the results file that we get was the one that had the issue. So the results were coming in, as we can see from the log files, but they were not going to the results file was not being generated. Therefore, our laptops in the transparency server room were not able to get the results. So in summary, we were able to do these 3 things to basically validate that the results were intact during the 7-hour glitch. Now, what has COMELEC done about this in the local source code review, which has started a few weeks back, the module that generates the results file is also now subject to source code review. We've also requested that the COMELEC do a stress test on that particular module to ensure that in this up and coming 2022 elections, the 7R glitch would not occur anymore, right? So this is on the first issue with respect to the 7R glitch. The next issue that keeps on popping up is the issue of what we call early transmissions, or transmissions that occur before the election starts, right? And there has been a number of videos and a number of social media posts with respect to early transmissions. Most of them happened before the 2019 elections, right? So this is one of the screenshots that I obtained from one of these videos showing that early transmissions has occurred. And just to explain what the screenshot does, right? So the maker of the video explains it nicely to us that there is a DNS server that is being queried. So this all happens before the elections if you look at the timestamp here. So May 13 was the election in 2016. So this is about the 2016 election. So the accesses were clearly, the DNS access happens before the election, right? So that was the claim. Now, the thing with DNS is what we call a domain name system. So you could think of it like a phone book. So if I am a person here in the left and I want to call person B here on the right, and I don't know the telephone number of that person, I will inquire with the phone book first. What is the telephone number of person B? The phone book or the DNS server in this case will reply, telephone B's phone number is this. Then I can make a call. So I inquire. Then after that, I can establish a call from person A to person B. So when you say transmissions happen before the election, that means person A was able to talk to person B. But what the logs show a while ago in the screenshot was simply the inquiries to the phone book, right? So it just says that there's a phone book, which is the DNS server, and you were able to inquire with that phone book whether you wanted to get the number of this particular party, but it didn't show that you actually made the call. So that's the first thing. Second thing is there are valid reasons to access the from person A to talk to person B, or from the VCM to access the CCS. So there are activities that happen before the election that are actually legitimate, and there would be transmission. So one of them, of course, the actual transmission itself. The second one is the final testing and sealing. So final testing and sealing occurs in the week before the actual elections itself, where the machines are brought to the precinct, they are opened up, and there are 5 to 10 test ballots that are handed out, and the machines are tested. The machine is opened up, and the final, those ballots are compared to the ERs generated to the machine. So this is like a testing activity that happens before election day, each precinct. Now, the final testing and sealing has this additional feature called network transmission test. So even during the final testing and sealing, the operator can initiate a network test that would validate that the VCM is able to send data to the CCS. But these are not results. This is actually a network transmission test. And in the source code review of 2019, we were able to review the code for the network transmission test as well. So that's final testing and sealing. It's a valid activity that occurs before the election where the transmission is actually tested. So it's the network test, but there are actually no results. Also, in the transparency server, we also see that the results are zeroed out before we start.
William, may add
sorry,
that in testing and sealing, all political parties, including PPCRV and the other NGOs, are welcome to view it. So what we're trying to do is to make sure that during the transport of the machines into the precincts, that they're actually working and they're counting a ballot that maybe there are 10 votes or whatnot that they feed into the machine to see if it's working and it's counting. So sometimes it sends early and we're able to catch that.
That's right. So in that particular case, that is a legitimate test exercise that is open, as Myla mentioned, to observers, which includes political parties and watchers, right? So That is, I think, and that's a very important activity. If we have concerns about that particular precinct, we should participate in both the election day monitoring and the final testing and sealing. Thank you, Myla. The third point here is the power on cycle. Once the machines are switched on, it is also part of what the machine does to check DNS and entries of hosts that it intends to make call connections to. But since the machines are not connected to the network during the power on cycle, right, on election day, then that means no transmission actually occurs. But there can be, for example, activities where this is necessary. And there, last but not the least, is network monitoring and testing. There can be DNS and entries from various entities for the purposes of network monitoring and testing. So the screenshot a while ago does show DNS entries, but the DNS entries per se do not necessarily are not necessarily categorical proof of transmission that happened before elections, right? So this is the second issue that we are covering today.
William, I'll simplify, no, for some people who are not familiar. So marami tayong naririnig paminsan na, bakit nagtra-transmit ang VCM? Hindi pa naman nag-uumpisa ang election. So I guess Dr. Yu is stating that some of these are legitimate processes na hindi tayo dapat mangamba na may magic na happen na nangyayari sa VCM, hindi pa nag-uumpisa ang election. Just to simplify, the DNS is just simple phone book or directory
for networks. Yep.
So I'll try to translate it into everyday language, Doc Hugh. Thank you.
Thank you, Myla. Right. So that's for early transmissions. All right. And this is just to show in terms of transmission rates, since we're talking about transmissions, these are the transmission rates for both. This is 2010, 2013, which was less than 2010, right? 2016 and 2019. So as you notice, I think that transmissions are removing the 7-hour glitch from the equation. They're actually better, right? So they're actually getting better and better.
William, ang sinasabi lang po ng graph na to sa X and Y axis is sa panahon ng automated election, within a few hours, we get more than X% of the votes in. What time is that, William? I don't see your...
So at the bottom, you will see hours since the closing, right? So at 10 hours from closing, we probably have 90% of the results, right? So 10 hours from 10 hours of closing. So we have the statement that after 12 hours from closing, you probably know the results for national contests.
So this is why we're really heavily supporting automated elections. I just wished in the future there were more bidders. We'll talk about that at some other time. But it really decreases the time of cheating, the window of cheating. Kasi in 10 hours time, halos alam na natin ang resulta ng elections. So I was a young volunteer in the manual times, and we waited weeks before we found out anything. Thank you, William.
That's right. Yeah, and thank you for that as well. So in 2019, just for reference, 5 hours after closing, we got more or less 85% of the transmitted results. So it's quite high. Okay. The second issue is something called the queuing server. So right before 2019, this became an issue as well, and it was still an issue in the last congressional JCOC hearing. It was still brought up as an issue. So I'd like to talk about the queuing server as well. So what's a queuing server? So this is the screenshot. So I took a screenshot as well from the video explaining what the queuing server was. So the statement is that the VCMs, instead of sending the data directly to the CCS, well, there's no CCS in this drawing, it actually passes through something called the queuing server first before it hits, here's the CCS, right? So instead of sending it from the VCM directly to the CCS, it passes through many things. So it does the DNS inquiry, which I showed a while ago. Then it sends the results through a queuing server. So that's the name that was mentioned. And the results from the queuing server are forwarded to the CECS. So this is the screenshot from that particular video, right? So now I'll just explain what a queuing server is. But before that, what most people think happens when I access a website. So think of the VCM accessing the CCS as a regular internet transaction. You use a network to access something from the internet. So when my browser or my laptop or my tablet accesses a web server, this is what most people think happens. This is my laptop. I access a google.com. It passes through something called the internet, and it gets to google.com. However, reality is not that impulse. So my laptop needs to access some router, whether my Wi-Fi hotspot at home or in my office. It passes through parts of the internet, so different networks, which is still quite complex, but let's just simplify this for the sake of discussion. It hits, of course, there were also the DNS servers that we mentioned a while ago, which are also on the internet. It passes through many routers. It passes through things called firewalls and load balancers to ensure that that the CCS, for example, and its components are able to handle your connections, transmission routers and the like. So these are what we call network-related equipment before it actually hits the CCS servers. And in some cases, the CCS servers may not actually be one server, but could be multiple servers, like in the case of the National Board of Canvassers or the central server or the transparency server, which the CCS servers, there are multiple. Now, in this particular case, you notice from the diagram previously, the internet is not just one big club. There are many pieces of equipment that have to be involved in order for transmission to happen. One of these pieces of equipment is what we call the transmission router. So the transmission router is one of these pieces here in the middle that help facilitate the transmission, right? So the transmission router is one of the many components in the middle. So there are routers, firewalls, and DNS servers. So the transmission router was subject to source code review. So we requested it. So it was subject to source code review in 2019. And it is also subject to source code review in 2022. And this is the documentation that we were shown as source code reviewers with respect to the transmission router. So the transmission router is a piece of equipment that basically serves to handle the connection from the VCMs and sends them to the appropriate CCSs. The reason being was that there are cases where the CCS is not ready to receive yet, but the VCM, for example, is ready to send. So what happens is the transmission router will queue those results before it is forwarded to the CCS server. So that is the function of what they now call the transmission router, right? So we also did, in additional in 2019, we also subject this transmission router to a network test. So we were able to attend a session where they actually installed the CCS. They brought a VCM in, and they installed the transmission router, and they showed how the transmission router works, right? So how the results got from one machine to another machine, just like in a real network where there are many other components in which traffic passes through, right?
Really?
So that's it on the transmission router. So it's, well, queuing server was the name that they created, but there really is a component called the transmission router, and the transmission router is meant to facilitate network connectivity.
William, let me try to simplify it again. So marami tayong mga kuro-kuro that I read in the media about these secret rooms or things like that sa mga telco na bago makaabot ang ating datos galing sa VCM to CCS. You hear CCS a lot from William. These are the canvassing systems. Diba galing sa VCM po, sa mga presinto, abot yan sa national. And in national, the canvassing happens in these servers before it's flashed across our screens. So what William is trying to say is that even in the internet, it has to pass through from one point to another, it has to pass through. So the network in I think you'll be talking about transmission more, William.
Yep.
The network in our election is a closed loop. So dumadaan po yan syempre sa ating dalawang telco na PLDT, Smart. I don't know what else might be used this time. But it does pass through various routers. in PPCRV, along with you in the transparency server rooms, we see the results coming in. But in an additional factor and why it is so important for us to have the parallel count is our 300,000 to 500,000 volunteers ay pinaghihirapan pong kunin ang fourth copy of the ERs in every precinct. Why? Because these are physically sent, I'll backtrack. Before transmission, we pick up the fourth copy of that return. Thus, each copy po ay dinadala sa ating mga diocese, hub and spoke from all the different voting centers. Sinacentralize po yan ng ating mga volunteers galing sa mga parokya at pinipick up po ng ating partners sa Air 21 and LBC at that time to bring to Pope Pius. In Pope Pius, we have 300 volunteers that encode every single national position against the electronic data na pinapadala ng VCM sa mga servers. Ibig sabihin yan, dapat magbabangga ang datos. The data has to match because if it doesn't match, something went on.
Digital dagdag bawas.
Yeah, dagdag bawas ang nangyayari. So, there's a combination of hybrid. We're doing physical audits against electronic transmission. So, kung naririnig po natin, sana wag na lang dagdagan ng pangamba that there's something happening in between because we do take a physical piece of paper. Very difficult to pick up 87,000 pieces of paper on election night. But last 2019 po, I think we were able to pick up 77,000 and we were able to match 99.99 of it.
Yeah, we can show that later, Mayla.
Yeah, thank you. But again, to put to rest the secret rooms and handshakes that are going on between VCM and transparency server, it's rather easy to spot because of the audit. Thank you,
That's
William.
Right. Yeah, so thanks for that, Myla. So although we are concerned about where the transmission path is with respect to the results from the VCM to the CCS, as Myla mentioned, we do have the unofficial parallel count, which is a partnership between the KBP and the PPCRV to ensure that this digital dagdag bawas does not happen. So we do that as an additional check in addition to this. And yes, most of the network equipment will live in data centers, right? So, and there are components of the data center, and sometimes they're called as meet-me rooms as well. Okay, so that is on the transmission router. And thanks for bringing up the unofficial parallel count as well, Maida. Right, now we will go to the next issue, which is missing transmissions. Right, so missing transmissions are, this is a concern that keeps on popping up as early as 2010. That there is this statement where if the transparency server does not get all the results, why can we proclaim a president, for example, or a vice president or a party list member? So this is just a look at the last 4 automated elections and the ERs that were received by the transparency server. We also took note of the ERs not received by the transparency server, but elections did occur. So even we at PPCRV have access to physical ERs, as Maida mentioned, that are brought up to our encoding headquarters in Pius. And this is the total ERs that we actually see, right? And this is the percentage based on the total clustered precincts for each of these elections. And this is the visibility. So, for example, in the last 2019 elections, the data that PPCRV has corresponds to 98.88% of the elections. So there's actually a lot of data that's being received, not just the percentage we see at the transparency server, which is a lower number. So here, for example, in 2013, where there were a lot of results that were not received by the transparency server, it only came out as 76.35% in the transparency server. But if we include the manual pieces that we received, there's 91.55. So it's a high percentage. But what we also must remember that the transmission, which is this slide I'm showing right now, this is how transmission actually occurs. Your VCM sends the data via various means, whether GPRS, mobile data, DSL, VSAT. It sends it to various servers, the transparency server, the backup server, well, actually central server, and to the MBOC first, right? And in this particular case, what happens is sometimes a transmission to the MBOC succeeds, but a transmission to the transparency server and the central server don't. And that is the reason why there can be a mismatch between the ERs received from the various servers, whether it's MBOC, transparency, or central server. However, there is a mechanism, or what we call a contingency mechanism, where if the VCM cannot send the results, say, to the MBOC, central transparency server, the physical SD cards, in the case of 2019, are put in an envelope and are physically sent to the MBOC. Now, the MBOC generally has better transmission capabilities than the field. And what happens is when the results here are canvassed, they can now be sent to the central server. And that's the reason why the central server will sometimes get more results, for example, than the transparency server. So the transactions aren't actually missing if they are not in the transparency server, but they may just not have gotten there due to various reasons, including telecommunications in this particular case. Right? So that is the issue on missing servers. Then the shading issue, so 25%, 50%, akala ko 100%. So the shading issue is also one of the things that came out, particularly in the electoral contests, right? So what is the actual shading threshold? Now, we always teach people, and this is a screenshot that came out in the news as well, that is this counted, right? In 2016, if I shaded this much, it would be counted. But if I shaded this much in the recount, it's not counted. So there is a discrepancy. And since we educate voters to always shade 100%, sometimes there is this perception that the machine threshold was set to 100%. Now, first of all, the machine threshold is never set to 100% because after doing the source code review, we found out that the shading area is actually a rectangle and not exactly this oval itself. So it has to be 100% of the rectangle. So really shading in the oval will only give you a certain percent and not really 100%. Two is the threshold set during the elections are different, right? So these are the thresholds. So first in 2010 and 2013, the threshold was set to at least 50%. So obviously, if you shade the whole oval, that will be more than 50% and the vote would be counted. But if it's a really small mark, for example, in the particular screenshot a while ago, in 2010 and 2013, that vote would probably not have been counted. However, in 2016, to reduce disenfranchisement, what the election managers did was set the threshold to 25% instead. Therefore, if you only shade 25% of the shading area, then the vote will be counted. And that's the reason why a small mark like that can actually be counted versus shading the whole box. And as I explained a while ago, the scanning area used by the machine is actually a rectangle, and the oval is just a convenience measure to inform or to tell the user that that is where you are supposed to shade. Right? So this is just some clarifications on the threshold. We educate our users to always shade 100% of the oval, but in reality, the threshold of the scanning machine is 25%. Or 50%, right? In the 2010, 2013, it's 50, 2016, it's 25. Most likely it stayed 25 in 2019, okay? And why does it matter? Because the machine will be precise. It will look at the percentage based on the number of pixels that were shaded, for example. But in humans, it is harder to distinguish between, say, 25% and 24%, for example. And that's why there will be differences in appreciation. And that's why during the random manual audit, for example, there is expected to be some discrepancy with respect to appreciation. Now, to avoid these issues, this is why we educate people to always shade 100% of the oval. Okay? Right? And my second to the last issue is much to do about, and yeah, this was an issue in 2016, right? So there was the issue. So what exactly happened there? So in May 10, 2016, which apparently is a while back, right? The PPCRV was approached by various observers because there was a hash code that mismatched. Now, what is a hash code? It is basically a short string or short piece of text that allows you to check whether a larger piece of text has been tampered or not. And this concern was a major concern for us because if the hash codes do not match, then the text could have been After further investigation, we found out that there was a change, which involved the ENIE character. Now, what happened here? The results file we got, and for those of you who were involved in the 2016 transparency server, you would notice that certain names, like Osmania, for example, would not be rendered properly. The ENIE character would not be rendered properly because the results file that was provided by the transparency server did not have, for example, that particular character. Now, a change was made midway during the canvassing and counting period, and that's the reason why the ENIE was suddenly corrected. However, they did not change the application that was generating the hash code. They did the change before the hash code was generated, and that's the reason why there was a change. So we were informed of that mechanism, and what we did is, of course, trust but verify. So we also did our own check. We basically took past results and we compared them with the hash code. So we generated the hash code that should have been generated. So in that particular case, we also published the procedure on how to do the test, and we allowed anybody who has a copy of the previous results to validate that. So if what they're saying was true, then the procedure should match for previous results, not for future results, right? So that means the only change they made was actually that character. Now here's just a screenshot in case you are interested in seeing how it's done. This is how we validated the code. We basically got an old result. We changed the ENIE, right? We corrected the ENIE character. We generated the checksum and we compared it with the checksum that was supposed to have been generated. Now, in this particular case, it matched, and that's why we were able to confirm that the only change that was made was the ENIE character. Now, of course, this created a lot of problems because there were some procedural lapses, because changes like this should not actually be made on a live system. And that's the reason why we have a new mechanism for receiving the results file in 2019, which was subject to the 7 outage, but that is the previous story I mentioned a while ago. So this is with the issue with respect to the ENIE character. So we verified and validated that there were no results, that the only change in the previous results was that the ENIE character was not rendered properly.
Okay.
And of course, last but not the least, yes, Myra.
Maybe I'll finish after this because I'm sure to people who are not techies, that's all gobbledygook, the green letters. So let me explain
I love
a
green
little
letters.
bit about source codes and all that. But maybe after this last slide of yours so that we can explain what we're doing, and I'd like to enjoin the media to please participate in these little steps that are open and transparent to us. But go ahead, William, and I will talk a little bit about source codes.
Thanks for that, Myla. So now, those were the issues that we encountered. So what do we do to actually watch your vote, right? So as Myla mentioned a while ago, there is an activity called the unofficial parallel count, which the PPCRV together with the KBP have been doing for 4 elections. So this is the product of our work for the last 4 all automated elections. So this is our key partnerships. Right, so the PPCRV volunteers on the field collect the 4th copy, as Myla mentioned. This is a pre-transmission copy, so even before network connectivity is connected to the machine, and this is after the final testing is seen, so we're sure the machine works. The 4th copy is printed and sent to our volunteers, which our volunteers bring to our headquarters to be encoded. And this is what we use to compare against the transmitted results. And as Myla mentioned, if there was a change that happened during the transmission, may it be in the transmission router or one of the canvassing servers, we would see it because the ERs would not match. So this is like the ultimate test to ensure that digital dagdag-bawas is not occurring, although it's a bit manual, right? So in this particular case, and here are just a few pictures. All right, so just a few pictures. So our volunteers from around the country, as Myla mentioned, it is not easy to collect 87,000, and in 2016, 90,000+ election returns. So our volunteers are nationwide, and they do it by horse, by boat, by car, and in many other measures as well. Especially the island precincts in the Basulta area, which are pretty hard to reach. Then at the same time, once the results get to our command center, they are encoded. And we have some happy and smiling volunteers here. And yes, KABP is a key part for this, right? And a lot of sponsors. So this is entirely voluntary. So we have many sponsors from PLDT Smart to AMA to the Boitis Group who would support this activity. And we have volunteers who are unpaid, by the way, and who give their free time to encode these ERs so that we can compare them, right? So the process of comparing the ER has a number of steps. The screen's not, there you go. So it has a number of steps. So each election return is encoded twice, right? So of course we do factor in that there's the possibility of human error during encoding. So each election return is encoded twice. We call this a double-blind encoding mechanism. They're encoding twice. If they match, then they are sent up to the results. If they do not match, then it's subject to quality assurance. The quality assurance team, which is basically historically a seminarians from the San Carlos Seminary, so thank you as well to them for supporting us, who would actually do the comparison to check if there was really an encoding error. Once the errors are identified and corrected, the results are sent up. They are now compared, then we now compare the encoded results with the transmitted results. Mismatches are again pushed through another quality assurance cycle to make sure that we just didn't have a double error, make sure it matches, and the results are reported. So non-verified results, there are a few, by the way, are sent to COMELEC for further triage and explanation. So as Myla mentioned, this is our results for the unofficial parallel count of 2019, right? So we did receive around, over 60,000 election returns. We encoded them. We compared them to the transmitted returns. So this is a Venn diagram. So the ones that we have transmitted returns and we were able to encode, that is about 60,139, or that is 68.7% of all precincts. So we were able to match precinct per precinct, 68.70%. Now of those precincts that we matched, there was a 99.995% match. That means there were 3 results out of the 60,000 that did not match, which we sent up to COMELEC for further verification. Most of these cases are what we call the off-by-one vote, where the scanning machine was able to scan it one time, scan the vote that counted, the next time it scanned, it didn't scan the vote, that didn't get counted. In these particular scenarios, usually the machines are replaced because they were faulty and the ballots were scanned again. So there are cases like that. So there's an off by 1, but 3% is a very, very small percentage, and the mismatches are usually just by 1 vote, right? So clearly we do have a large degree of coverage. This is slightly less, by the way, than 2016, right? So 2016, we got over 70%, which is a lot more. And this is where we actually need help, because the more ERs we get, the more ERs we can verify, right? Because in this case, we were not able to encode only 989 ERs. So actually, we could have done a lot more if we got the other ERs, which we did not receive, okay? And here are some of the real issues and that we would like people to focus on. First, we have a bearer-based control system. So whoever has the ballot machines, the keys, and who controls the particular precinct during election day, and there are no poll watchers, has control of the election in that particular precinct. And there are still scenarios and there are still cases in the last 4 elections where this has been occurring, particularly in what we call controlled areas. And this is the reason why we need poll watchers. We need poll watchers to be present at these precincts from the final testing and sealing to election day, to picking up the 4th copy and sending it to us for encoding. The UPC allows us to validate the results to make sure that when they are transmitted and sent, and the results are used to proclaim the particular candidates, that the truth actually comes out. So it is very important that we have poll watchers in the polling places, and we have some room for improvement in that particular space. The second thing is, of course, better transparency. A lot of these problems, like the ENIE and the 7-hour glitch, could have been better handled if the explanation to the stakeholders were made better, right? Of course, better preparation as well. Things like the 7-hour glitch and the ENIE would not have happened if proper testing or additional testing was done and there was proper time to prepare, right? And of course, last but not least, more options for election system providers. As Maida mentioned, we do prefer that there would be more bidders that to make the system more level playing field for additional bidders, and we support any move to ensure that there are more participants in this process and not just a few or one, in this case, one vendor who has been there for the last 4 elections, right? And this is why we need your help. So in PPCRV, there are many roles and many volunteers. You saw a few a while ago, the poll watcher. You saw some VAD participants or the voter assistance desk, but we have many, many types of roles. So there is the AMVAT team, for example. I'll just give a few examples that basically monitor the warehouses. So for example, if we're concerned about a logistics provider changing the machine during the warehouse stage, then our AMVAT teams are actually part of the inspection during the warehouses and in the regional hubs during the logistics shipping of particular election materials. We also have volunteers, for example, who observe the printing at the National Printing Office. So that is part of the role of the AMVAT team. We also have the Power Prayer Group. Of course, we are firm believers in the power of prayer, and this has started early as well. We're doing a digital prayer campaign. As you see, we actually have some of those already. We have the tag group, which is myself and Romel. We basically handle the tech aspects, including the unofficial parallel count. Then we have various types of poll watchers, and we also have the unofficial parallel count encoder, who does encode the results. In the voting place, you will probably see most of the volunteers that you will see in the polling place would be our volunteers for what we call the voters assistance desk. In time of pandemic, this is actually much more important right now because we don't want voters to be unnecessarily crowding, and that's the reason why we are beefing up the voters assistance desk, because we are actually we also have this in elections, and we would like to have a voters assistance desk for every polling place, right? And there are a lot of support activities as well, our media team, our legal team, and a lot more, where these are all composed of 100% volunteers. And here are just a few pictures of our volunteers, right? So this one is a few volunteers in our voters assistance desk and what they call the accessible polling place for senior citizens and PWDs, which PPCRV volunteers also help man. So here are more shots of the voters assistance desk. We even help carry wheelchairs up, especially for precincts that do not have accessible polling places. So we help PWDs and the elderly reach to their polling places as well, right? Then of course our social media group, right, is also very active, particularly active now, even early on. Right. And that's it for my presentation. And of course, as PPCRVs, we're here for clean, honest, accurate, meaningful, peaceful elections, and volunteers are always welcome. So thank you very much, and that's it for my presentation. And Myla, would you like to say a few words?
Yeah, thanks, William. Well, maybe just pull back a bit, no? There's a lot of activities that happen before Election Day. So the green stuff in the screen that William had shown, yan po ang code. No? So as of today, there are a lot of volunteers, mga estudyante, mga technical people who are pouring through, I don't know naman if it's how many lines of code, but there's quite a lot. May million ba?
It's about a million, yeah. It's about a
million lines of code. Imagine reading that. But there's more than the eyes of PPCRV. And if you have experts dyan sa ating media community, sana makasama kayo. You can be under the wing of PPCRV in the future, but that will give more transparency, no? Ang printing of ballots po, we are going to request that it is fully streamed. As you know, ballots that are printed really belong specifically to certain precincts, so that's another control mechanism. We mentioned final testing and sealing. Ang atin pong mga volunteers and other volunteers are welcome. I hope the media participates. Will look bago pa umalis ang ating VCM sa Manila, papunta sa mga presinto, ay pinapanood natin before and after. So there's many opportunities for transparency. And as you can see, our volunteers are probably marami ngayon mga kabataan because it's a pandemic. Please help us support them. it is not very easy to know that for our volunteers, they're giving their free time, pero ang katabi nila, napakadami pong tinatanggap para maging poll watcher. So it is really a labor of love for the volunteers. Let me be precise in what we did today. PPCRV believes strongly in the power and the benefit of an automated election. However, it is our position that we should continue to lobby in the future to have many more participants in the bidding process. Technology moves very quickly, and there are other technologies that we might be able to look at, but we have to start early. Ang nangyayari po is we lack time. When I say we, our country mostly lacks time kasi nagsasalita lang tayo about the issues pag malapit na po ang election. So I hope immediately after the election we can lobby for a change in the procurement law. It is probably because of that law that only a handful of bidders can participate. So it's not really anyone's fault because it is the law. So maybe we should push to change that law. I guess we're counting on you to really help quell this information. And of course, we will challenge anytime there is something that is anomalous that's happening. But let's also remember, and it's happening before our eyes, that in very strong democracies, it's cracking. The democratic processes are cracking because of the rabbit holes and extremism that this information is fomenting across social media. So I hope we can help educate and open discussions with our communities on, the value of truthful and factual information. I think that's one of our big challenges. What we showed today, again, it's not perfect. There are many issues that will happen on election day, and we're just all here, you and I, and PPCRV and KBP, to be vigilant. And while we are not here to answer all questions, we will certainly ask a lot of questions if it is needed, as it was in 2019. Further along, I hope that we can call out for volunteers. It is my worry that our pandemic will, of course, and understandably for the older members of our communities, it's going to be very difficult to be a watcher. So we're counting on our young people to come out and be volunteers. And nothing changes a person as much as to be a volunteer and watching how fragile our democracy is. So I hope that we can help in the process of encouraging them to volunteer. I don't know if we have time for interesting questions and answers, but I bring it back to the host. Thank you again, KBP, for being our partners. We really appreciate you so much.
Thank you very much, the chairman of the Philippine Pastoral Council for Responsible Voting, Ms. Myla Villanueva. Thank you very much, ma'am. And also, before we move on with the question and answer, it's better for us to understand who are speakers and who are the people behind PPCRV. Kasi normally, all of us, I'm sure, especially yung mga nandoon sa mga probinsya, pag sinabi natin na PPCRV, ang iniisip natin, more on watchers lang to, yung nakabantay na nagvo-volunteer. But it's better for all of us to understand that those who are members of the Board of Trustees of the PPCRV are really those with the IT background and IT specialists. Kanina po in-introduce ni Ms. Myla si Dr. William Yu. So he is also the Chief Technology Officer at MDI Novari, working on digital transformation, elastic infrastructure, and end-to-end agile DevOps. Sana po tama yung basa ko, Dr. Yu. Kasi alam mo, kami po sa broadcasting industry, we are not very techy, sabi ni Ms. Myla kanina. But then again, as an industry, what we can do is, of course, inform the public how we can all work together. Pero it's good to know na from the time the ballot goes in and from the time it comes out, some people from PPCRV are making sure na lumabas ang tamang resulta sa eleksyon. So maraming salamat po, and we are supporting you on that. So we will set some of the questions from our members. Let me move on. From Mr. Jomay Paroco. How many copies of ER does the counting machine prints and who gets them? Can you get an electronic copy of ER from the counting machine with a USB?
So allow me to answer that question, and thank you for the question. So the number of ERs that are printed are governed by law, right? So there are a certain number of ERs. I think the first one goes to the major. The first one is the copy of the precinct. The second one is the posted copy. The third goes somewhere. The fourth copy is the one that goes to PPCRV and the KBP. That's our fourth copy. There's a fifth, sixth that go to the political parties, major and minor political parties. And I think there's a few copies for a local political party, major and minor as well. And that's the first 8. And what happens is after the first 8, transmission occurs. But that's not the end. After that, after transmission, up to 26 or 28 copies are printed, and there are various recipients for that succeeding number of copies. So there are actually a lot of election returns that are printed. So to answer the question, in order to receive a copy of the printed election return, you have to be in that list of recipients for the election return. However, based on experience, we found out that since more copies are printed than people receiving them, the other watchers can actually pick up those copies kasi usually maraming extra na print. Now, for the second question, can you get an electronic copy of the results? Well, you get them from the transparency server. So that is how we get a copy electronically. So the results are sent from the VCM to the Municipal Board of Canvassers to the central to the transparency server. We get an electronic copy, or at least a copy of the results from the transparency server. Can you get it via USB? No, because you're not allowed to connect any external device to the vote counting machines. So I hope I answered the question. Thank you.
Okay, so a follow-up on that. When we talk about data match, let's like for example, you presented that earlier in the 2019 election. Of course, you can get an official election copy, and there is also the one that is actually from the computers itself. Meron po bang ipinagkaiba from the last time? Was there any percentage na iba yung print copy, iba yung lumabas sa computer? Yung in totality, yung national na po na result.
Sige. All right. So thank you for that question. So the unofficial parallel count, we cover only national positions, right? So to answer your question, yes, we do validate the national position. So we normally validate president, vice president, and senator, right? If there's no president, vice president, it's just senator. So we validate those. In the 2019 elections, we were able to validate over 60,000, right? So of the 60,000 plus that we encoded, we validate all with the exception of 3. So there were 3 we sent up to COMELEC for escalation, which has an off by 1, meaning one particular candidate got 1 vote more or less than they were so opposed to, which was subject to triage and handling by the COMELEC. So vast majority, 99.95% matched.
Okay, thank you.
The question.
Yeah, so let's move on with some of the questions from our chat box, but we also welcome questions from our members who have waited for this Q&A. From Teresita David, to prevent doubts in the election counting process, what steps can be taken to prevent a repeated glitch?
Right, so that's also a very good question. And yes, the 7-hour glitch, medyo kahit may nagalit din doon. The glitch, in order to avoid the measures that COMELEC has put in place. So I'll explain first what they promised to do, right? So number 1, they would subject the code that generates the results file to local source code review. So at the moment, we now have access to that source code, and source code reviewers from the various parties and watch organizations are able to review. So that's the first one. The second one is they would subject the code to what they call a stress test. So the idea is that source code would be subject to a stress test where they would try to simulate election day results. So many results arriving at the same time. Our initial analysis or our preliminary analysis of the root cause of the 7-hour glitch was that particular component na bulunan, right? So wasn't able to handle the volume of returns that came in during the first few hours of election. So we requested that that piece of code be subject to a stress test, which they said they would do naman. So those are the two things that COMELEC has promised to do to ensure that a repeat of the 7-hour glitch would not occur anymore. Thank you.
Okay, from Mr. Derek Gonzalez, although I think the question should be answered by COMELEC, pero wala po tayong COMELEC dito, so either Ms. Myla or Dr. William can answer. If ever there was a mistake in shading a candidate's name during elections, is it possible or permitted po ba to request for another ballot?
Right, so the quick answer is no, right? So there is something called the general instructions, right? So before each and every election, the COMELEC would release a resolution called the general instruction. So the GI basically contains the procedure that the EBs and the BEIs would follow during election day. The GI also describes scenarios like that. What happens if a voter would like to request a new ballot and things like that. So that's the reason why we keep on harping during our voters education campaign that people be very careful when they shade the ballots, because you only get one ballot. Now, to add context to that as well, the reason why you cannot get an additional ballot is because precincts do print exactly the number of ballots based on registered voters. That means that if more than the registered voters vote, there will be a shortage of ballot, which is actually a good thing because there should only be exact number of ballots. So you can't get an extra ballot, because if everybody decided to vote, then there would be a shortage of ballots. So that's the reason why you normally can't request for an additional ballot. Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Yu, the random manual audit recommended to be done in selected precincts after election involves audit of actual ballot totals versus election returns versus transmitted ERs. But COMELEC refuses to do it and prefers to do it in COMELEC centers. I think that's in COMELEC centers.
Okay. So first off, the PPCRV is not the one involved in the RMA. So that was run by Lente in 2019, and it was run by so it's run by, and it will be run by Lente as well, together with NAMFREL for 2022. So the process or the counting, whether it's centralized versus precinct-based, is actually decided by the RMA committee. So the RMA committee for 2022 is composed of both Lente and NAMFREL. We are all observers there, but it's basically that committee that decides the process. So it's not COMELEC that actually decides whether it's central or at the edge. Now, there are pros and cons to having the counting be done on the precinct itself versus the ballots be sent up for counting. But I think you can bring that up to a friendly Lente or NAMFREL volunteer. So naghahatian po tayo with respect to election watchdog roles.
Yeah,
right?
Actually, I'd like to add, we've been asked numerous times by COMELEC to also handle the random manual audit, which we prefer that another group or party, credible groups and parties to conduct, in order that there are more voices and there are more points of view watching our election. So it's a good thing to have random manual audits by others. However, it is also, well, at least my personal position, along with some of our board members, that we would like more precincts to be counted. Meaning, I think we have 750, William.
Yes, Myla.
I forget the exact number.
So 1 to 3 per congressional district.
Yeah, we wish there could be more. Why not 2,000? Why not 3,000 in order to audit more and for it to be statistically significant for the public, enough for the public. It, of course, requires more budget, and that's outside our purview. So maybe that's something we can have a conversation about for the next election with the help of the media.
Okay, hopefully we have a lot of time because we have a lot of questions coming in, but I'm following the thread. So please bear with me. From CNN Philippines, Greg Cahiles. Ms. Myla, what are the particular instances where the procurement law impedes the entry of new technologies, and which portions of the procurement law must be changed?
Okay, it's called the SLCC, or Single Largest Completed Contract. That's under RA 9184, I believe, Section 25, Section 23.5.1.3, I believe. So what it's saying is that a contractor should have been able to complete a similar contract in the past. And having said that, magkano ba ang ginagastos natin sa ating procurement, William? 4 billion, some billion number.
7 billion.
So you can imagine na wala naman masyadong ganong kalaking company that will be able to step up and say, hi, I'm a local MDI company. That's my company. Sorry, I'm making it an example. Can I do an election bid? No. So there's some value to asking that company has enough strength and experience in order to participate in a very important national election. But there are also some names na nadi-disqualify because of that. I'll give you a specific example. In the US, it's not a national election, and they have companies bid on since they're federal, no? Counties, LA
Per county, yeah.
Yeah, LA County has, for example, Dominion. I forget if it's Dominion or not.
Smartmatic po, ma'am.
Smartmatic.
The only
Pero
one, actually.
Sorry po. Pero may Dominion, may Gem Plus. There are pretty much a lot of good companies around the world. Diebold, another being another one. But they conduct small elections. So sana at least for our election itself, Congress can allow some of that to get changed. Now, it's hard to change a law. So some of the ideas we were thinking is, bakit hindi po ibid ang Luzon, Visayas at Mindanao magkahiwalay? Para maganda din po ang participation ng iba't ibang companies. So, but it's specific to the law, and unless we change the law, I'm afraid very few people can participate in the bidding. So we have to start that conversation immediately after this election, I think.
Okay. Yeah, from Al Santa Clara, is PPCRV sending the impression that the present automated election system is on the all-over a reliable system for our elections, agreeing to the way the COMELEC is implementing the AES law of 1997 and amending RA?
Napaka 100% naman yan. Hindi po. We have so many problems on election day, right? But what we can assure you is a certain amount of diligence with you, our partners, to make sure that we can at the same time trust but verify, debate and ask questions all the time. So I think that's our joint efforts, as well as a diligent public. I guess what we're saying is that we have, together with COMELEC, other NGOs, have constantly tried to ask and address questions of a past election. Kagaya nga nung 7-hour glitch, ngayon talagang pinapressure natin, please don't let it happen again, because talagang sobra na po ang pagdududang mangyayari in the public if it happens again. It's not perfect, but we should sort of improve on the past elections and try to do better. Again, technologies change, so new problems will crop up, but I hope that the old problems become just resolved better and better with your help in the media. Now, I want to point out, while we have 99% matches. And I think Lente in the random manual audit also got very high marks when they opened the ballot boxes and matched the physical ERs with the ballots naman. Sa amin sa transmission, sa Lente, sa pagbilang ng particular ballots, no? Mga 99.9 din ata sila, William. If
9995, yeah.
See Doc Arwin is here. He looks at those. He's also a board member of the PPCRV as well as Romel Bernardo. So by and large, we keep on criticizing the automated system. Sure, go ahead, because it's important in a democracy. But please don't forget, a lot of the cheating is happening outside of the automated system. Vote buying, shading of ballots. I saw in the chat group. Kung walang mga watcher dyan, talagang mangyayari yun. Yung nagsishade ng mga ballots at sinusubo sa VCM. So I think it's our role to watch that, right? Not to give up on a number of hours before a VCM gets resuscitated if it needs to get fixed. For example, sirang mga VCM, mga SD card na hindi gumagana, all of that is a time frame for cheating that we should watch very closely. So I hope we can continue to ask questions outside of the automated system because I think there are a lot of eyes and audit trails. There's another piece where we're seeing a very different type of cheating, which you and KVP really have a role to play. I'm not saying it's happening here. I don't have any proof, but there's foreign interference that was proven in the U.S. Election in 2016, I believe. They were also proven to do that. But that's around social media. So obviously, I don't have the answers except for us to ensure that there's not a vacuum of truth. If there's a lot of disinformation, I think media should fill up that vacuum with factual knowledge that you have. And, we need to be equal in that issue. Is that meaning we ran out of time? That music?
No. We still have a lot of questions. So siguro yung hindi mga sasagot na questions and even comments, you can find it in the chat box. But let's continue. This is just related to the earlier question with regards to amendment and change on the procurement law. From Rappler Dwight De Leon, may I know what specific provisions in our procurement laws the PPCRV wants amended or changed? And number two, Smartmatic could bag millions of pesos worth of contracts for the 2022 polls. Is this related to PPCRV's call for amendments in our procurement laws?
Talaga naman leading question. Oh, that's not, there is a specific, I'm not saying that, okay? I'm saying that we really wish that there would be more bidders in our future elections. And there is a specific provision in our procurement law. I will get the exact one para hindi po tayo magkamali. Section 23.5.1.3 of RA 9184. Sinasabi lang niya na kailangan kung 8 billion, for example, this is an example, please don't quote me on the very specific. For example, 8 billion ang contract, meron ka na bang na-participate or na-complete na project na parang 4 billion ang halaga? I believe it's a 50% threshold before you can join an election bidding. So that's quite a high bar, but it's the law. So it's not within our capacity to change the law, but we certainly would like to question it more in the future.
Yeah, and I'd also like to add that there's this balance that we have to put between reliability, because that provision is placed specifically so that we have a way of measuring track record, right? But at the same time, it is also a barrier to people who don't have that particular track record yet. So the solution is hard, right? So we at the PPCRV, we don't have a prescriptive, please change that section, please say, we're not saying that, just to be clear. I mean, we did quote particular areas of that we have to look out for, but we don't have a specific recommendation here. And we are basically calling that a discussion happen for this. I mean, we have to talk about it, and we have to do so before the next election cycle. And as Myla mentioned a while ago, that conversation must actually start as early as possible.
I don't want to be misquoted. I know we're all in this together, but we don't have a solution yet to that clause, no? Kasi meron din namang nangyayari, we also question, bakit ang capital po ng isang company, 100,000 lang, nakakasali sa billion peso contract? So there's a plus and minus to everything, but I think we should revisit it. That's all I'm saying. We should revisit how we procure, and maybe there are certain things that we can change in order that we have more options than we have today. Thank you.
Okay, so Philippines unit now, the 2013 season was extremely low, just over 70%. Why did this happen? Were the electronic results based on the limited info?
Sorry, Anna, sorry.
The actual results.
Sorry, we cannot hear. It's also
Loaded.
like Mr. Bernardo, who's present here, if he has any comments. By the way, we cannot stay very much, over noontime. It is the 30th anniversary of the PPCRV today. And for our dear friends in media, it is Parish Pastoral, not Philippine Pastoral. I've been hearing Philippine Pastoral. It is Parish Pastoral Council for Responsible Voting. We are a lay organization. So our members are really in across 86 dioceses across the country who are working for your elections. And today we celebrate with a mass at 6:30 to honor the history and, how it all started. Ambassador De Villa will be there. We will be in person in Pateros, San Roque Church. And celebrating our mass would be Bishop Milo Vergara. So it's an important day for us, and we welcome you to join the live stream of that celebration.
Thank you, Myla. Lorleen, I think we just have to allow our guests to, enjoy the celebration of the 30th anniversary. Happy anniversary, by the way, Myla, no? And to the members of the PPCRV. So maybe, Mr. Chair, can we have our message and thank you, parting shot for our guests, Mr. Chair?
Well, thank you very much, PPCRV, Mylan, and happy anniversary. But before I do that, let me just ask the chairman of the AM Association, Alumni Association, to say a few words. Chairman Mike, can you just say a few words? In behalf
of, Thank you, June. No? So good afternoon, everyone, and greetings to all our event participants and to all the leaders of our partner organization, the Kapisanan ng mga Broadcasters ng Pilipinas, headed by its chairman, June Nicdao, who is also part of our AIM Alumni Association's Board of Trustees. Our Alumni Association of the Asian Institute of Management is one with the KBP in working towards an honest, fair, peaceful, and orderly national elections on May 2022. Just like the KBP, we at AAAIM have our education committee that provides our members with the current information, programs, and activities on educational best practices and higher learning opportunities available in different industries, issues, and challenges. We also provide other pertinent information deemed necessary to give our members and all our stakeholders the opportunity to achieve the level of knowledge and skills necessary to serve their respective organizations with competence and professionalism. As the leading alumni association of graduate management schools in the region, we make ourselves available to support the different organizations in our country. We are an association who knows, loves, and shares knowledge and leadership. Of course, during this time of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, we really need government, business, and voluntary organizations to work together for the benefit of everyone. Today's situation calls for the all single person in an organization taking responsibility to make a difference in everything they do at work and in their personal lives, especially in choosing the next leaders of our country. As what we always say at AIM, we lead, we inspire, and we transform. And being AIM alumni, we always say and challenge ourselves and everyone, leadership, we must live it. So in behalf of our AAAIM, congratulations to KBP for taking the lead in organizing this valuable event. Our sincere gratitude also to our esteemed presenter, the PPCRV, headed by Ms. Myla Villanueva and Dr. William Yu, for sharing with us today their valuable time and talent as subject matter experts. We at AAAIM are committed to continuously to support the same valuable and noble partnership projects of KBP and PPCRV. And just like KBP and PPCRV, we will continue to do good while doing well as we make positive changes in the lives of many, because we are AIM alumni and that leadership we live in. So God bless, stay safe, and all the best always to all of us. Maraming salamat po. Back to you, Jude.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, in behalf of KBP, we'd like to thank again PPCRV. And by the way, Chairman Myla, no, marami pa tayong gagawin. Well, let me start. Aside from the quick count that we always do, we in the KBP have been already talking about voters' education. I think that's a common advocacy that the KBP and the PPCRV want to implement. And the KBP Committee on Voters' Education has started its planning already, and we need to interface with you in the production of public service announcements to educate our voters. We also would need subject matter experts from PPCRV for guesting, so that we can educate the voters more about the intricacies of the forthcoming elections insofar as the automation is concerned. No? The KBP is also headed by our president, Mr. Herman Basmanio, in the thick of preparations for debates, because as we know, in the debates have been a very important component of the electoral process. I think a lot of people will know more about who the leaders should be from the debates, and we've seen that in the previous presidential election. So we're glad to be of service to the country, and together with PPCRV and the other associations like the Alumni Association of AIM in pursuing the goal of ensuring a clean, honest elections. Yung sabi nga ng PPCRV, champ. So maraming salamat po sa inyong lahat, and we will have more conversations, Chairman Myla and Dr. Yu. Marami pa tayong gagawin. This is a very important elections in May. The future of the country depends a lot on what happens in May. So maraming salamat po, and back to you, Lorraine.
Thank you very much. Parehong Chairman yan. Oh, wala na si Ms. Myla. Just to mention it again, sabi nga nila, it's PPCRV, which stands for Parish, hindi po Philippines. So Parish Pastoral Council for Responsible Voting. And congratulations and happy anniversary sa PPCRV. Napakarami nating question. Kapatid na Noel, Ms. Ina, pasensya na. Maybe you can do an interview with them na lang kasi napakarami talagang pumasok na question at napakahaba din po ng presentation. So, ang dami nating information ngayong natanggap ngayong araw na ito. So, thank you, Dr. William is still with us. Thank you very much, Dr. William Yu, for all the answers you've shared and the presentation that you've shared with us. Sana po may next time pa ulit. Matagal pa naman, several months to go before the elections.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much.
We're always here. Thank you very much.